Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas, on Friday, November 7th, and welcome to our commentary. I have a post over at the American Thinker this morning, uh, suggesting to the mayor-elect of New York City, Mayor-elect Mandani, that he should get together with the president of Argentina, President Milei, who recently won a sort of like a midterm election down there in Argentina, and his political prestige and power have grown considerably because of that. But I have a post over the American Thinker today where I recommend to the mayor-elect of New York City just to sit down, maybe spend a day or two with the president of Argentina. Maybe he can take a quick trip to Argentina with his wife, maybe enjoy a little vacation and spend some time chatting with President Milei, because they had an affordability problem in Buenos Aires, which is the capital of Argentina, and they had a tremendous problem with the cost of rent. And one of the problems they had in Argentina was rent control, that there was some very severe rent control, and the price of housing, apartments or homes, was always going up. And, many of the landlords simply chose to keep the apartments empty. It was actually cheaper to keep an apartment empty than to actually bring in a tenant, because there were all kinds of problems. And once you had a tenant, you couldn't evict them and all that kind of thing. But that has changed, and some new ideas have been implemented to free up a little bit the housing market down there. And then all of a sudden, there's more availability, there's more inventory, and prices are dropping. And that's why I think the mayor-elect of New York City, Mayor Mandani, should go down there and see how it's working. Those are free market ideas that are working quite well in Argentina. And Buenos Aires is a big city. I don't know what the population of Buenos Aires is, but it could be probably about as big as New York, in terms of New York City, that is. In terms of population, I think Buenos Aires could very well easily be a city of almost 10 million people. So in that respect, the two cities are similar. There's also a lot of apartment buildings in Buenos Aires, just like there are in New York City. So I actually think this would be a very good idea for Mayor-elect Mandani to take a trip down there and see what they're doing to cut down the price of housing and to make housing more affordable, and how you can do it through the free market. What a neat idea that is. How you can do it through the free market. Now that's something to think about. And all they've done, frankly, is just, make it to do away with some of the rent controls, and just, allow the rental market to operate in a free market. And the consequence of it is that more people can find affordable housing now than even a year ago or 2 years ago. So maybe that's what they need to do in New York. And, instead of giving away things for free, maybe they should make it easier on the landlords to operate in a free market. And then maybe that will increase not just the number of homes, but maybe more production of homes, because what they need in New York City is more homes, more residences, okay? Because it's expensive. And a lot of the reasons it's expensive is because there are a lot of people chasing very few places to live. So I'm, suggesting that to the mayor-elect of New York City. He may not take me up on the idea. I don't know. His base may not allow him to do so, because he has I think, very socialist base. Or certainly he's surrounded by a bunch of people who think that government can fix all the problems. He himself said that in that speech that he gave. He says, not a problem's too big for government. Well, actually, there are some problems that are too big for government. There are some problems that government cannot handle. And in fact, government makes things a lot worse when they get involved in many problems, when they step on the free market, which is, of course, the best way. The best way to make things affordable is to produce more, allow more production, allow more construction of homes, let the free market work, and you'll see a lot of investment. People will invest if they're going to be able to make money. But if you if you have an apartment and you have all kinds of rent controls, and on top of that, you cannot evict a tenant because of all the laws, well, no, you may end up deciding, you know what, I'll just keep it empty. I'll just keep it empty. Or maybe I'll just turn it into an office and rent it out to somebody, a law firm or whatever, as an office, or I don't know, some consultants or whatever. That's, what they need to do in New York City, open up the affordability, or open up the market so that more people can afford it. Pretty sensible idea, and it's being done. As I said, it's been done in Argentina. So check out my post over at the American Thinker this morning. I've got a post coming out Saturday morning where I talk about this Supreme Court opinion that just came out here in the last day regarding gender and passports. When you get your passport, of course, it says your name, your gender. I think it tells it says the color of your eyes or whatever. I don't know, maybe your skin color. I don't remember everything. I haven't looked at my passport in a while, but you definitely identify your gender, female or male. Pretty sensible thing. It's been done ever since passports have existed. Well, some people were protesting that discriminates against people. I'm not exactly sure what they mean by that. But anyway, it went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, it's okay. It's okay. It's not discrimination to simply state on the passport what your biological gender is. I mean, you can pretend to be a woman. You can, I don't know, you can live your life as someone of the other gender. But when it comes to identification and official identification, whether it's your driver's license or your passport, we got to know what your gender is, and your biological gender is the one that is going to go on the airport on the passport. So this became controversial, like everything else these days becomes controversial. But the Supreme Court, to their credit, said no, we got to have that gender in there. There's nothing discriminatory about doing that. And here we go. The opinion was passed, and it's a tribute to common sense. That's all that it is. It's just a tribute to common sense to be able to list your gender on your passport. It's like your driver's license. Yeah, your gender is on there. Your height, your weight, I think the color of your eyes in your driver's license, I believe. And again, that's all for identification. It doesn't mean anything else. It's just identification. That's all that it is. And so anyway, I'm glad the Supreme Court decided that, because it just makes a lot of sense. That's all I can tell you. Well, on this day in history, this is one that I remember. 1972, President Nixon was reelected. I mean, by huge numbers. I think that his reelection in 1972 is still the highest percentage of the popular vote. Even more than Reagan in 84, more than LBJ in 64. And he won 49 states. He only lost Massachusetts, I believe. And, it was just a coast-to-coast wipeout by President Nixon. He was running in 1972 against, who was it in 72 that he was running against? Was it McGovern? I think so, George McGovern. And what was interesting about that election is that the whole Nixon presidency was Vietnam. But by the time we got to 1972, by the time the campaign actually started in the summer of 1972, the war in Vietnam had pretty much gone to the back pages, because most of the troops had been taken out in this program of Vietnamization, where we were taking out troops and, building up the South Vietnamese army. And then eventually, I think that when people went to vote on election day in 1972, there were only like 20,000 American troops. We had gone from 500,000 when President Nixon came in to 20,000 when he was running for re-election. So I think a lot of people saw that and said, yeah, we like that. The economy was okay. It wasn't the greatest economy, but it wasn't bad. And overall, Nixon had been very successful on foreign policy, with some deals with the Soviet Union, the diplomatic deals, some treaties and all of that he signed. And then, of course, the trip to China, when that was a very dramatic trip, if any of you remember that. So I think by the fall of 1972, I think most Americans said, okay, we're going to vote for this guy. And then, George McGovern never came up with a campaign that made any sense. Once Vietnam was out of the picture, he really didn't have anything to run on. There wasn't really an issue for him. So it became just a bad election for George McGovern, but a great election, of course, for President Nixon, who 2 years later would resign over the Watergate scandal. So I remember this day because I don't remember. I think I was working. I had this college job, I think it was a college job that I had. And I was working at this factory a couple nights a week or whatever. And on election night, I had my little radio on. You remember those transistor radios we used to have with a little earplug? And I was listening to the countdown of the election. I mean, by 9 o'clock, it was over. By 9 o'clock, the election was over. I mean, I think he got all of the projections. Even before we got to the West Coast, his victory had already been projected. He got over 500 electoral votes. It was just an amazing victory. So Richard Nixon reelected on this day in 1972. And of course, then 2 years later came the Watergate scandal and he had to resign. Well, thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas. Have a great weekend, everybody. And we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.